Hi, I'm Mark Beebe. It's good to be with you. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with codependency. We're going to continue our series on strongholds. We've talked about the basics of what a stronghold is, and what we've said is that a stronghold is something that basically moves in on your heart and attaches itself to your heart, and it is something that once it is on your heart, you're not going to be able to release your heart from it by yourself. And we've talked about the fact that strongholds are insidious. We're going to talk about that more tonight. They are progressive in nature. They are dominating in nature, and they begin to suck the life out of us. It's like the opposite. A stronghold has the opposite effect of the desire that Jesus has for all of us, which is us having what he calls abundance, or what you would understand to be like a full life. And so the strongholds that we're talking about in this series, every one of them ends up being an enemy of ours, and every one of them ends up being pushed on and developed and accentuated and fed, by our own weaknesses, yes, by our own character defects, but also by the influence of the enemy's desire to restrict everything about our lives, and secondarily, by his desire to be able to separate us or move us away from the fellowship that God naturally wants to have with us and has built into us and into his relationship with us. So we're going to be talking about tonight the stronghold of fear of abandonment and rejection. Let's pray. Sweet Jesus, we thank you for this time and for this place and for the opportunity to come and hear from you. Bring your Holy Spirit into this talk, and bring your Holy Spirit into our hearts and lives, that we can be available to you and we can find out what it means that you're in this with us to overcome these and free us from these strongholds that we're talking about. In Jesus' sweet name, amen. Before we get started, I also want to remind you to keep paying attention to recoverycokesbury.com for changes in schedules. You will see on that website up-to-date information about where in-person groups are being held and what time they're being held and what day they're being held. You'll see on that site what groups are being held online, and the links will be available to you on that page. And we'll make that as up-to-date as we possibly can. So continue to pay attention to that for any updates that we're going to have about what we're going to be doing in the next week or so. So fear of abandonment or rejection, there is a set of life maps, we call them, that are called schemas. They're life narratives. We've talked about them a lot before. Maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't. You can go to recoverycokesbury.com and go to the watch portion of it on the left on the menu, and you can find a series on schemas that'll teach you the basics about schemas. The book is Reinventing Your Life. We have that available in the office, so you can grab one of those. If you've never read it, I would highly recommend it. And what it does, what schemas do, is help you to identify, look, these are the things that are base drivers in my life. Helps me to understand maybe where they came from when I really begin to look at them. Helps me to understand how they've been sort of, in a lot of ways, pushing me around and determining the way that I see people, places, things, the way that I see life. And so I want to talk tonight about the domain. So schemas are put into domains or into groupings. About the grouping that we're going to call disconnection and rejection. And here's how that is defined. The essence of this schema domain is about a general expectation that your basic needs, security, love, support, encouragement, affection, all those basic needs, food, shelter, etc., will be met by others in an unpredictable or an inconsistent way. In other words, the base needs that I have in my life, if this is something I'm struggling with, is abandonment and rejection, on a regular basis, on the reg, I'm gonna wonder if I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna wonder if anybody really cares about what's happening to me. I'm gonna wonder if anybody is really out there who I can count on. Many people who identify with schemas within this domain come from families perceived of as being cold, detached, explosive, unsafe, lonely, abusive, or rejecting. And so again, relative to relationships and critical relationships, the reality of a stronghold is that it's insidious, as we've said before, in nature, meaning it's almost like it compounds unhelpful, negative, hurtful interest. And so if that domain is something I've been brought up in, if I grew up in an environment, let's say, and I am an adult child of an addict or an alcoholic, a lot of what I just talked about in that domain is going to make sense. Because the addict or the alcoholic in my life, if I'm growing up with someone in active addiction, what do I know about that? Well, I know the principal concern that person or parent is going to have is going to be for themselves, and it's going to be the feeding of their own addiction, right? And so that means I'm going to be left on the outside of that. And so if I'm an adult child of an addict or an alcoholic, everything I just read is going to make sense. And how do I, coming out of that domain, coming out of that background, emotional background, how do I ever find any real security in my life? Well, there are several ways that I'm going to try to do it. One is what we're going to call the insidious performance trap. And that goes like this. My worth is always and only equal to my performance and to the opinion of others. So my worth, the way I see myself, the way I understand my value, the way I understand the way other people are going to relate to me, is that my worth is related only to or valued only by my performance, what I get done in life, and also my opinion of others. So out of that performance trap, you got to be able to see some of the base plates for codependency, right? Like if I believe that my performance is paramount, and I believe it's paramount to the value that people put on my life, and I believe that the opinion of others is paramount, well then how I do for you, what comes best for you, what I make right for you, how I overfunction for you, all of that, it's all going to fall into this performance trap, right? Because now it's not just that I want to overfunction for you, or I want to try to manage the stuff in your life, but it's kind of like I feel like I have to, because if I don't do it, well then you might leave me, and I'm going to struggle even more. And I know what that leaving me feels like, and I don't want to have that feeling again. So I overfunction with my performance, and I overfunction because I want you to have a positive opinion of me, because if you do, well, maybe you won't leave me. And how do you start to manage that performance trap? Well, you completely change the valuation of how you know yourself. So the way you change the valuation is, instead of saying my worth equals my performance and the way others value me, you say my worth equals only what God says about me. Well, what does God say about me? Well, God says, you're the apple of my eye. God says stuff like, you are worth, you in every way I laid down my life for you. He calls us priceless. So gemstones, basically. He tells us regularly how much he loves us, how much he is for us, how much he has always been for us and on our side. And so the way you deal with that performance trap is you move to that valuation that my worth is only going to be about what God says about me. There are a bunch of defense mechanics. In addition to the performance trap, there are a bunch of defense mechanics that will feed this stronghold of rejection and abandonment. One is going to be what I talked about already, which is control and manipulation. I'm going to figure out how to manage the relationship so that you don't have the possibility of leaving me. And I might use a lot of things. I might use guilt. I might make you feel guilty. I might do a lot of things, but I'm going to find a way to keep you in the hopper. I'm going to find a way to keep you and I in the pen. I'm going to find a way to keep you and I together. If I'm not overdoing for you, then the flip of that would be I'm going to find a way to create a helplessness that you're going to be overdoing for me. And so I'm going to find a way to manage the relationship that I have with you by always keeping you close. You know, maybe you've been in a relationship like that, or maybe that's been you that's been involved in that, but either one of those, you got to know, you got to be able to see what kind of damage that does. You know, that instead of it being a free and open relationship based on the free opportunity for choice and decision, well, no, I'm going to basically coerce you into the kind of relationship that I want to have with you. And I'm gonna basically do to you before you can do to me, and I'm gonna basically try to manage the outcome, almost as if I'm speaking for you. I'm gonna kind of manage the outcome in the best way I possibly can that advantages dealing with my fear of rejection and abandonment. Second defense mechanic that feeds this stronghold is I'm gonna build walls around myself. People in my life are generally only going to get so close. They're only going to get so far into a conversation with my heart. They may have a conversation with my head. They may have a conversation even with my immediate needs, but they're not going to get too far generally with my interior, with my heart conversations, because guess what? I want to build up walls effectively and tall enough walls so that you're not going to be able to get so close to me that I might fear the pain of you leaving me. And so I'm going to build those walls to be able to protect myself from what I might see as the inevitability of you leaving me. And so third defense mechanic, very popular, self-sabotage and self-fulfilling prophecy. Go into a relationship, and I get to know this person, and I start to enjoy their company, whether it's a friend or a dating relationship or whatever. I start to enjoy their company. But now that I'm starting to enjoy their company, I'm starting to worry about, well, how long before they're going to leave me? How long before something is going to happen where they don't really want to be with me? How long before that's the case? And then I feel rejected and left alone all over again, which I already struggle with that fear, right? And that's already a dominant feature in my life. Well, so now the relationship that I'm building with you, I might try to get to you before you ever get to me. I might try to create something in the relationship that's going to blow it up, where I can say, well, she did it and he did it, and what happened was I tried, but they did or they didn't or whatever. But in the end, I'm the one that took the shot to keep my distance from somebody, almost like pulling the Heisman, to keep my distance from somebody in order to make sure that I don't get hurt. That's the self-sabotage. Could happen in a variety of ways. I might know something about that person and go for a hard shot at something that they're particularly vulnerable about. I might prove that I'm really not trustworthy. I might not show up for an event or not show up for dinner or not show up for something else I said I was going to do. I might prove myself to be, unreliable or whatever. So I might do that. There are a lot of ways, but any way you look at that sabotaging and self-fulfilling prophecy says, I am going to end this relationship on my terms before you leave me or abandon me. And that's what that defense mechanic is about. Fourth, we may want to make people prove love to us. We had a conversation as we were building this talk, and we were talking about foster children. And we were talking about the fact that foster children, in a lot of cases, are going to find the person that they are the most, in fact, the most comfortable with and feel the most, at least potentially, attached to. And they are going to put that person in their new relationship with their new family through all kinds of difficulty in their relationship with them. They're going to show out. They're going to be challenging. They're going to be argumentative. They're going to be difficult. They're going to be rebellious. They're going to be all of that because they're trying to find a way to see if that other individual will prove to them through all of that adversity that they love them. That's somewhat of a different defense mechanic, obviously, than the self-sabotage, right? I mean, one says, I'm going to end the relationship first, and I'll be the damager. That's safer. This, what I'm talking about, the proving of love, is trying to see if there is credibility in the relationship that I am the one that is valuing. Let's see if I act out in the case of the foster child, and then let's see what the foster parent or foster family member does with all of that. And so it sort of takes us to a place of limiting the kinds of relationships we can have and limiting the opportunity for freedom that love, authentic love, actually brings. It's like what I guess you would call emotional and a level of emotional and spiritual captivity. I'm going to be the definer of something that, in fact, I'm not in possession of. Like none of us are by ourselves outside of what God does with our lives and with what God does with our hearts. None of us just have this innate capacity for love. When you love, whether you're a Christian or not, you're loving with the love of God. Whether you're a Christian or not, you're loving with the love of God because God provided you with that emotion and with that experience and with that power. And so when we're making people prove it on our terms, we've kind of robbed ourselves of the freedom of that gift. And we find ourselves in emotional and spiritual captivity of that limitation of what I want and how I think it needs to be and what I think security is for me based on that prove it mechanic. Another defense mechanic really has to do with understanding the depth of how disappointed I am in people in general and the fact that I carry that disappointment within me and the fact that I believe that instead of giving somebody that I meet new in my life the benefit of the doubt, I'm really giving them the benefit of the history. Right? So the benefit of the history is people really aren't reliable. People really aren't loving. People really aren't lovable. People really aren't safe. People really aren't secure. People really aren't generally trustworthy. And so I really should keep my distance from friends, people at work and whoever, because eventually if I befriend somebody, if I make a friend, if I develop a relationship, whatever, I'm only going to get burned in the end. And I have a suspicion about people before they ever really even introduce themselves to me with any kind of a level of depth. And man, that is a real short circuiter that's gonna cause even more. That's sort of the self-fulfilling side of this. That's gonna cause even more abandonment and even more supposed rejection. But see, the fact of the matter is, in that situation, I am actually, which is going to be hard to imagine, but I mean, from a lot of us, but I'm actually the abandoner, and I'm actually the rejecter with that sort of self-fulfilling prophecy thing that's going on with me. There's a large piece of this stronghold that has to do with something that we're going to call the bitter root. And if you look and you read, you were to really do a word study on bitter root, you're going to see a lot of stuff, especially in the Old Testament, that talks about this long thread of negative history that is going through a relationship in a family line. And man, it is absolutely accurate when you start to examine family systems and the way that families relate to each other. Is there's almost always, at least in a larger family, there's almost always going to be some bitter root from somewhere, some resentment from somewhere that eventually, left unchecked and left untreated, takes on a monstrous life of its own. And all kinds of things will occur because of it. So the definition by John and Paula Sanford is this: bitter root is an insidious little weed. Insidious meaning can't put it away, can't get rid of it, doesn't go away, keeps regrowing, all of that. An insidious little weed that becomes a stronghold, choking out character strengths of others and highlighting flaws, or choking out my own character strengths and highlighting my own flaws. And man, there's so much history, especially in the first half of the Bible, about this whole bitter root side of things. It starts out really, almost right away. We've talked about the Adam and Eve story a lot, and I think it's such an important story when you begin to understand sort of life basics. And so you have Adam and Eve, and God tells them, exactly what he wants to have in their relationship, and he's really looking for an understanding of love, demonstration or whatever, of loving obedience on their part. He wants to see if they're willing to trust him, which is what loving obedience is really like. Do you trust me? Right away, they tell God pretty much, no, we don't really trust you. That goes back to the whole story of him giving them everything they could ever need, and them choosing the one thing that he asked them not to choose. And so the bitter root that starts right there is the enemy going, did God really tell you that you didn't have a license to do what you want to do with that tree over there? He really tell you that? Why would God tell you something like that? What he was trying to tell him is, aren't you angry? Aren't you angry that God is trying to one-up you? We talked about that last week with the issue of pride. A lot of the stronghold of pride, really you can trace back to a bitter root somewhere in somebody's life. Did God really say that? Aren't you resentful that God's holding that one thing back? There's 20,000 trees, but aren't you resentful that he's holding back that one? And the bitter root is there. The bitter root is in other stories. Like you can read up on a story about Jacob and Esau. Bitter root shows up in the book of Job. Very difficult book to read. The bitter root really shows up in the story Jonah. And you have Jonah sitting there at the end of that story, and God is, he's been thrown overboard by his shipmates because he's rebellious. And God has a fish swallow him, and he lives in that fish, and the fish spits him out, and God tries to take care of him on the land where he lands, and Jonah's still really put out. And when we leave Jonah, his entire life has been captured by a bitterness, by a bitter root about the fact that God wouldn't let him do what he wanted to do, and God wouldn't let him go where he wanted to go, and God didn't provide him with the outcome that he wanted to be provided with. What does God do with bitter roots? Well, here's what God does consistently. Number one, God always searches. He was searching for Jonah. He was searching for, another story is a guy Moses, searching for Moses, dealt with Jacob and Esau, deals with Job, searches for the opportunity to free our hearts from this stronghold of abandonment and rejection and bitter roots. He goes searching for Adam and Eve, and what does he do when he finds them? Well, he gives them clothes. God clothes them. God provides them with shelter, this rock that they're behind. It really isn't the fear of God that I think in that story of Adam and Eve that is so shocking. that they run because they're afraid of God, that they hide because they're afraid of God, that they feel guilty because they're afraid of God. I think the shocking part of the story is that God is the one that is searching. Like, they're not searching to go talk to God about what happened. They're not fixing to go talk to God about their bitter root. It's God searching. And it's God searching at a great cost. And the great cost of God searching, we're going to find out in the thread of the storyline of God being such a good searcher and such a good searcher for you, is going to be the life that he allows his own son to lose on a cross. God searches at a cost, and that ought to tell us something about the question that we got to ask tonight. And it starts like this: like, it may be true that everybody else in my life, I think, has let me down, and I'm living with that fear that's going to keep happening. It might be true that everybody else in my life has rejected me, and I'm going to live with that fear that's going to keep happening. But what I want to know is it true about God? Is God searching for me tonight? Is God trying to find me tonight? Is God trying to bring me shelter from what is overwhelming me tonight? Is God trying to bring me clothing to clothe over the guilt and the shame that I'm feeling tonight, the losses that I'm feeling tonight? There's so many prodigal stories, and I've named a bunch of them beyond just the prodigal son story in the second half of the Bible, in the Bible. They're showing up all over the place. The reality of it is, if we're honest, every one of us has plenty of prodigal in us. And the reason I think there's so many different stories is because God is sitting there in all the stories going, well, Mark, is that you? Do you think that's like you? What about this guy? Is he like you? What about this woman? Is she like you? What about this over here? Is that person like you? Which one of these prodigal stories are you, Mark? Because one of them is you. I wrote one about you. So many prodigal stories. Every one of them have different reasons for the people that are in them feeling rejection. But you see, God always has the same reason for the opposite of rejection and the opposite of abandonment. And God's alternative, God's antidote for this stronghold is always acceptance. It's always acceptance. It's the reason for his acceptance of you is always going to be Jesus. It always was Jesus. It always is going to be Jesus. In all those stories, even in the first half of the Bible, before Jesus even you think shows up, it was still Jesus. It was still Jesus showing out as the heart of God in those stories, with him saying, I'm coming for you, I'm looking for you, I want to be with you, and I want to free you from this stronghold on your life of feeling like everybody always leaves you, there's nobody you can really trust, everybody always rejects you, and you must not be good enough. You must not be a good enough woman, or you must not be a good enough man to receive love. Like, that is the depth of the stronghold of abandonment and rejection, that I must not be a good enough woman, or I must not be a good enough man to be able to deserve love. And as long as I feel that way, and as long as that stronghold is in place and in play and active and dominating my heart, I'm going to have a whale of a time accepting the help that I need to deal with whatever it is in my life, whatever compulsion it is in my life that is bigger than I am. And I mean, the reality of this stronghold is it's going to keep coming. It's going to keep being active. It's going to keep being a major deal for you. It's sort of like if you were to imagine yourself on this day walking out of this place or leaving where you are and having Jesus go, okay, this is the last day you're going to feel that way. This is the last day you're going to feel rejected. This is the last day you're going to feel worthless. This is the last day you're going to feel unloved. This is the last day you're going to feel abandoned. In about 20 seconds, what's going to happen is what I want to read to you, and it's back from last week, the conversation from last week about pride, the 4th chapter of Luke, dealing with these temptations of the enemy with Jesus and the whole pride issue. But that last part, the last part of that story is critical to understanding the rhythm of recovery and the reality that this is daily work that is work of a lifetime. You don't deal with a stronghold in your life and go, well, that was like having a blister on my hand. And I put stuff on it for a while, salve or whatever, and you know what, it got better. It's like, no, the potential for that blister can come back at any given time. That's what a stronghold is about. This is a one day at a time. This is a one day at a time recovery story that we're in the middle of tonight. And it'll always be one day at a time. And my recovery from a stronghold is always going to be one day at a time, because here comes the enemy. When the devil had finished tempting Jesus, when the devil had finished working on putting that stronghold into your life, eventually, because you used Jesus to experience freedom from that stronghold, he left you, he left Jesus until the next opportunity came. So I deal with the stronghold in my life. I think I'm doing just fine. I stopped coming to recovery. I stopped going to meetings. I stopped talking to a sponsor. I stopped reading important stuff, especially for abandonment and rejection. I stopped reading stuff like boundaries. I don't go to a boundaries class. I decide that, I don't really need to read stuff on codependency. I decide that I don't need to read stuff like Search for Significance and deal with my sense of understanding my worth. And guess what? The stronghold is back. Stronghold is back. This is daily recovery, using a daily rhythm that is going to be foreign to my stronghold, foreign to me, new learning that I've got to see and work with and make a part of me every day, every day, every day. If you put off going to meetings, go. Go. If you put off reading the literature, if you put off reading the 12 and 12, if you put off reading the big book, if you put off reading the essay book, if you put off reading how Al-Anon works, whatever your base text is, read it. Do it. Understand that being free from a stronghold requires that rhythm and requires that outside influence, which is Jesus, to move inside to your heart, to take up residence in the place where the stronghold existed. Leaving a void in your heart is going to make space available for the recurrence of a stronghold or another one. Don't become a victim to the repeat performance of the enemy. The way you reject that is the rhythm of recovery that we talk about over and over and over again. I want to thank you so much for being a part of this. We'll see you soon. Thanks so much.